welcome back. We're ready to talk about theology now. And what I'd like to do first of all is to delineate between conservative and liberal and kind of understand it that way. Now, before we get too far into this, I want you to first of all take off whatever cultural blinders you may have that consider liberal to be a bad word or conservative to be a bad word and the other camp to be good. We want to observe this kind of objectively and see if we can understand the two basic camps so that we can recognize some tendencies in both of them. Liberal, conservative, it's really kind of a tricky way to talk about theology because it's a little bit slippery, I guess you could say, trying to define one or the other. For example, in Russia right now, politically, those who are conservatives are the communists, and the progressives are the ones who are going toward free market and democracy. In the United States, it is the progressives who are moving towards socialism, and it is the conservatives who want free market, and it's a matter of where we've been. So we'll talk about it in these terms. First of all, liberal. How do we understand that? Well, probably the best way to understand the word liberal is what do we mean when we have a liberal helping of something, or it means generous, right? To be liberal means to be generous. So our question in the theological realm is, who are we being generous toward? And I guess you might say we're being generous toward the doubters, toward the Muslims, toward the seekers. We're being generous toward those who don't hold to the tight set of doctrines that we have. Maybe in its most general sense, that's what we mean by liberal. What then do we mean by conservative? Well, to conserve something means to preserve it or to keep it. So the question is, what are we preserving? What are we keeping if we are conservative? Well, what we're keeping is, I guess, traditional teaching about the understanding of scriptural inspiration, or the virgin birth, or the resurrection, or something like that. We're holding to the ancient teachings. Okay, so that's an easy picture. Now let's start talking about details of liberals, because I would say there are four kinds of liberals. There are the radical modernists, and so they're both radical and moderates, and there are modernists and postmodernists. So let's start with radical modernist. And I guess you'd say that would be the secular humanist. We could spend a lot of time talking about all that, but in effect, that's the group. The people who have kind of traditionally been liberal for more than one generation here, and who in effect kind of have a secular view of mankind. Now, they may be Christian and they may use Christian terminology, but this is the approach that they come from. While I'm there on radical, let's go to radical postmodern. The radical postmodernist is more a New Age spiritualist who's open to the newer, more touchy-feely and mysterious end of things, rather than kind of a secular, scientific approach to spirituality. They have a very spiritual approach to things, but nonetheless from a radically liberal perspective. Well, now we'll talk about the moderates in both of those camps. The moderate modernist, and there are many of all of these people. The moderate modernist, I guess, would be a part of the ecumenical movement. You're a Presbyterian, I'm a Methodist, this is a United Church of Christ, this is a Catholic, but we all have Jesus in common. So let's get together, maybe even merge our denominations, but in any case, we can cooperate in some way with one another, because after all, the differences between our teaching are rather small. Well, it's especially easy for liberals to have that viewpoint instead of conservatives, because conservatives are afraid of being affected in some way by being with the others. Okay, so the ecumenical movement, basically, would be the moderate modernist. Then we have moderate postmodernist, who I would see as being the seeker-driven pragmatist. Seeker-driven churches are liberal in the sense that they don't talk about controversial matters, um, and they do what it takes to keep people and to get them in the door um, as far as theology is concerned. All right, we could spend a lot more time on all four of these, but there's a basic introduction to liberalism. I want to give you 7 key buzzwords that mark liberal theology. I'm just going to fly through these. Number 1, the Word of God. They use that term, the Word of God, but what they mean is the Word, the Bible contains the Word of God. The Word of God might be prophecy, but we're not going to use that word, so we kind of generically use that term, Word of God, and it can be confusing to a conservative who hears that. Number 2, the role of women is very important because egalitarian values are important in liberal theology, and so there will be a tendency to have gender inclusivity, not just in talking about people, but even in talking about God. So we'll alternate him and her, or refer to God just as God, so we don't have to use a pronoun that has a gender attached to it. In short, it would be this approach of saying culture over revelation. I know that God seems to have used a male pronoun for himself, but that was in a different culture. In our culture, that's not appropriate, and so we use gender-inclusive language. Okay, that's number 2. Number 3, lifestyle issues. There are any number of them, but that would include abortion, and homosexuality, and smoking, drinking, playing the lottery. These are all things that conservatives, it's very clear that conservatives all believe the same thing about those things, and they're against all those things that I just mentioned. Liberals would say, well, we want to take a generous view toward those who are in those kinds of lifestyles, and so we are tolerant. After all, there is no absolute morality, and God's grace extends to everyone. So, lifestyle issues. Then, likewise, notice what liberals do with references to heaven. They will turn that into talking about improving earthly life rather than the hereafter. Conservatives talk about heaven and the sweet by and by. Liberals will talk about the sweet here and now, and we need to do social justice type things, which brings me to the matter of social justice. The highest work of the kingdom is to do social justice, and they get that from many places in the Bible, that we are called to speak up for those who can't speak for themselves. We're called to take care of the oppressed and to relieve the suffering of those who are hurting. Then imagery of war has been removed from songs or whatever it might be. Singing Onward Christian Soldiers is just not appropriate, because if you've ever sent someone to war, Jesus is all about peace, not about war. And it's just wrong. So we don't talk about war. We don't have any of that imagery of spiritual warfare or anything. And lastly is any references to Lord and King. We kind of remove those when we're liberal, because those are leftovers, culturally speaking, from slavery and from oppression. If you have a king, then you're going to have serfs, and if you have a lord, then you're going to have slaves. And not that that's bad, but it's demeaning to people. We must make sure that we preserve their pride and their integrity as people.